I hate manhwa, and what I will go over in this video is the poor pacing, terrible paneling, awful art style, poor use of coloring, and a bit of the writing. I think the only manhwa I've actually enjoyed reading was Sweet Home, because it didn't overstay its welcome, and actually told a compelling horror story while using the scroll format to its advantage, having every scroll be something that could be spooky. It did a good job of imitating the page turn, which in horror manga is the definitive way of building tension. The idea of what will happen when I turn the page, will it be bad, will it be good, will it subvert my expectations, is basically how horror in book form makes tension without having music or quick cuts like in movies. Sweet Home imitates this, but with scrolling, and fully takes advantage of having every panel take up almost the full screen, by having most scroll downs be something that could spook you, or build tension. Anywho, outside of me glazing Sweet Home, let's talk about manhwa in general. First on the agenda is scrolling. Scrolling down completely ruins the idea of panel composition, and how panels are composed in manga is a huge portion of what makes them enjoyable to read. A good example of this is Fujimoto with Chainsaw Man. When I read Chainsaw Man, my eyes know exactly where to go, and I can completely understand what's happening solely based on the way everything is constructed. There are also these magical moments created by the two-page spread, like Oda dropping one in the most recent chapters of One Piece just to emphasize how huge of a moment something is. There are just so many different ways to express yourself in the composition of your paneling, and so many ways to make yourself stand out just based on your paneling alone. There's such a lack of artistic expression in manhwa. It's all just individual panels stacked on top of each other in this disgusting manner. It's almost like the equivalent of editing a vertical video. There just isn't enough space to do much, unless you take advantage of the restrictions. The reason I started this video with a rant about Sweet Home is because I believe there can be advantages to this format, but the restrictions for the webtoon format are so big that it is almost impossible to have good paneling. Even Sweet Home, to some extent, I find bland. Speaking of bland, have I mentioned the complete lack of soul in the art styles? I really wanted to say art style, because a lot of the time, they all just copy each other. But in actuality, it has to do with poor coloring choices and the lack of detail. Everything just looks so polished and robotic. Okay, so I wanted to hammer home my point a little bit more with the color and also the art style take. So I just looked up best colored manga panels, and this is what I've kind of found. I think that there's still a lot of uniqueness coming out of this with the way that it is colored and done, but I don't think it drives my point home too much, so I did a little bit more. I also looked up best manhwa art, and I found some stuff, but it almost feels like there's this Instagram filter on top of it. It's kind of like when a photographer takes a photo and it looks really good, and then an Instagram white girl takes a photo and then they add all these garbage filters on top of it that make it look 10 times worse. This is what I found for really good manhwa art. I actually do like this. I think this is cool. This has kind of like a paint aesthetic and stuff like that. It's really interesting. I would do without this like stupid text. I think the text they could have like, I don't know, drawn instead of just typing in Photoshop and just smacking it on there. Like really kind of ruins the piece a little bit, but yeah, I think this stuff is pretty good. This is actually really good. This, is a little in my opinion. But I think that stuff's good. But then I was like, okay, how do I actually delve into this topic? Because of course there's going to be good manhwa art, just in general. You know, there's so much of it, there has to be. Well, I just looked up, like, the first chapters of a lot of stuff. This is chapter 8. But okay, this is chapter 1. Okay, this is, like, kind of just... It's just so bland. Like, there's the panel composition and the actual coloring and art style is bland and boring and whatnot. And I pulled up Weak Hero because it's one thing I've actually read. I just think that there's not a lot going on here. And then I also have chapter 1 of this like random one. Which one was this? This was Omniscient Reader, because I just looked up like most popular or whatever. And it's like, dude, what is this? Like, tell me this ain't the most manhwa-ass art style ever. Bland colors, most like normal ass, like smooth looking art style possible. Okay, like it's just boring. It's like genuinely just boring. And then I go to this is actually the Genius, or the box, or it's the Boxer episode 1, The Genius. This looks cool. This I really like. It's like this cool, like kind of like, what is it, sketch-esque style. But then you get like a little bit further down and it's like, oh wait, whoa, cool panel? Oh wait, guys, we gotta remember, this is a manhwa, so we have to look normal. We have to just like look completely and utterly normal. I think this image is funny, but we have to look normal. So now it's back to like this kind of normal-esque style that Manhwa usually goes for. It kind of looks a little bit more like Weak Hero than it does the other one, this one that's a little bit more just like bland in every way. But when you go to this, it's like, okay, this looks cool. I think there is definitely a lot of potential here in the art style, and I think that they switch it up enough to make it slightly more interesting than the rest of the series. But then I got like Solo Leveling, the chapter from when he's like fighting the ant guy, and it's just so flat. I don't know how to describe this. It's just so flat looking in comparison to Manga, which we'll get to in a second. It's just so flat. The only thing that separates a lot of the flatness is this like stupid just glow effect that they do on everything. And outside of that, it's just a flat looking piece. And let me see if I can find some more stuff here. Here's the ant guy or whatever, because I commented on it later on in the video. But yeah, it's just like pretty bland and basic in my opinion. And then I go to like Oda color spreads and I'm like, dude, you cannot even compare. This is like night and day. There's so much going on here. You can tell that the artist actually cares about adding color instead of just doing it as like an afterthought. You go to Chainsaw Man, and a lot of manga, what they'll do is the first like couple of pages of a new series in chapter 1, they'll do stuff like this. But like the color actually looks like it's made to actually fit this person's style because they're the person coloring it, if that makes sense. In comparison to Manhwa, where it's almost like you have to color it. So because they have to color it, they all just color it the same. And then there's also like panels like this. You will not find something like this as much in Manhwa. Yes, you will find the rare panels that look like this, but as far as chapter 1 of Chainsaw Man, and you're already getting something like this. Then we go on to something like One Piece. One Piece has very cool panel composition. There's a lot of shading in the earlier era of One Piece. But this is chapter 1, you know? This is like, it's super unique. You can't even say that these two things, like you can't say this looks like this. They're different. They're like actually different. Or fundamentally different. Then you go to something like Gachiakuta. Now this is their coloring. You notice something here? If I go up and I go to this Chainsaw Man coloring, you see how this is like fit for Chainsaw Man? Okay, now I go to Gachiakuta. This is completely different. This is like this kind of like graffiti, weird style, whatever. But this is so different, okay? These are completely different things. Unlike if I go to this, where the heck was a person? If I go to this and then I go to like Weak Hero or something, yeah, they're slightly different. I get that. But the coloring is just, like, come on. It's so just like polished and bland, and yeah, so you can't even compare this coloring or colored manga to something like Chainsaw Man. But then you also get panels like this. Chapter 1, this. And he keeps up this consistency for the entire series, by the way, with a lot of different stuff going on in it. And then just generally his art style has like a lot going on. His angles are really cool. And it's just generally completely different than the two prior, okay? And then we go on to Boichi, our god, the guy that draws like some cool stuff every now and then, aka every time. And he started doing this kind of intermingling of normal like black and white manga and a bit of color to add just a bit of like flair to it. He still does this like flash glow effect for things, but it's way more subtle and not as egregious. At least from what I've seen so far, because I think there is only one chapter released. But he does like these little color adds to almost just emphasize things and whatnot, and then he'll do some full color spreads. But even if, hypothetically, let's say his coloring did look like Manhwa coloring, the difference would be that he's in a completely different industry and nobody colors like this in manga, you know? So that would be the argument if he did color like Manhwa. But the thing is that he would be the only guy doing it in manga, so it wouldn't matter as much. But yeah, that's kind of to drive home the color and art style point a little bit more. I just wanted to go over some of the differences between like chapter 1s of different mangas and then a couple of different things in Manhwa where they just look very similar or almost flat, at least to me. That's how I feel about it, okay? Back to the video. Every time on Webtoon there is some creative art style, it's usually made by some random Twitter artist, or by definition isn't a manhwa. And I have to say, I love it, just for the fact that it looks different. A good example would be Lore Olympus. To be clear, I've never read it. The story could be bad, but the art at least looks different. And I think that's one of the reasons it was so popular, because it actually stands out. The manhwa industry, however, is composed of the most uncreative people on the planet. It is actually impressive how they all seem to draw the same. At this point, they might as well all just start using AI, because it's all the same art, with all the same paneling. What even is the point of having a drawn medium if you aren't taking advantage of the fact that it's a visual art form? At this point, just make a light novel. I don't even think the art style is good. I hate the stupid glow effects that they just throw on the pages, and lens flares they add to make things look a little less bland. They have the advantage of color, but they never seem to use it for anything breathtaking. Not that they can, because they would still be working with this uninspired art style. It kind of feels like a mix of both the art style and the coloring, because sometimes the art style is slightly different, but the coloring is the exact same, or vice versa. So it comes across as the same, uninspired style. I want to clarify that there are probably some standout manhwa that I would enjoy, but it's hard to find something to read when a lot of the time I start a manga with "this art style looks cool," which is how I started reading Gacha Akuta, and that manga's fantastic. There are still a lot of instances where I find a plot interesting and start reading something, but my experience with manhwa has been poisoned based on series like Weak Hero, Unordinary, and Solo Leveling, of which completely fell off in my opinion. Weak Hero is the one I remember the most. I genuinely had to stop reading it just based on the fact that for chapters and chapters, nothing would happen. Or they would just focus on things that don't push the plot forward. If I were to compare the long-running manhwa I've read when I was little to something like One Piece, one chapter of One Piece would be the equivalent to around 20 manhwa chapters, solely based on what happens in them. If I were to pick a more normal manga like Dr. Stone, I would say it's probably around one Dr. Stone chapter is equivalent to 10 manhwa chapters, and that's being generous. Weak Hero was a special case though. One chapter of One Piece would be the equivalent of 50 later chapters of Weak Hero. That story really threw itself in the trash, and even ruined the main gimmick of the character which made the story interesting. That being, he was a weak guy that came up with clever ways to beat people up. But just like Solo Leveling, he becomes too overpowered. Basically, it seems that most manhwa completely lose the point of the story when it gets to a certain length. So, if I ever see anything remotely long, I turn away, because I just don't trust manhwa authors with making a long-running series. This isn't as much of a problem in manga. If a series can last long in Shonen Jump, there's a good chance that it's pretty good, because otherwise it would have been canned, like so many manga in Shonen have been before. But for manhwa, that isn't the case. If a manhwa author wants a series to keep going, it will, no matter the audience. If a manga author wants it to keep going, but it's terrible, it will be shut down completely. That is specifically why Shonen has made so many standout mangas, because of the fact that if your quality plummets, so does your series. Anyways, I got a little curious about the downfall of long-running manhwa, and because I'm not the most educated on the topic, I started watching some YouTube videos on it. And Squid the Cynic's theory is that manga authors don't pay attention to the fans as much, where manhwa authors pay too much attention to the fans, leading to them losing their original vision for the series they ended up making. He also pointed out a few more series that got worse with time, those being The God of High School, Rooftop Swordmaster, and Solo Leveling. Solo Leveling falls off after the Ant arc, because he just becomes God, and they make him almost too cool constantly. And that's pretty much it for the series, because there's no threat anymore. Kind of like if Goku never had a rival after Frieza, and just bodied Cell and Buu. Goku also had heart problems after Frieza and still had to become strong enough to compete with everyone else. Solo Leveling at its best is Dragon Ball at its worst, aka them just throwing people at a villain until Goku gets a new power-up and saves the day. I also told someone that I think there are no screenshotable moments in Solo Leveling, and they were shocked. I like screenshotting manga pages, I find cool, but there is nothing in Solo Leveling that is screenshot worthy. Because the art is just a cluster of glow effects during fights, and outside of that, it's just bland. The point is, manhwa art in general is bland and boring, with no style. The use of color, which should open so many possibilities, is a complete afterthought. Just look at any colored version of a manga, and it will show you how color could be used. The story usually loses the plot when they get too long, the paneling sucks because they are so restricted, and I doubt I will ever get into another manhwa again. Because manga is just so much better in every way. I would say it's basically like junk food. I can't fault you too much for reading it, just like I can't fault anyone for eating McDonald's, but I doubt you'll gain anything of value from the experience. I have moved on to higher pastures, such as Chainsaw Man with its awesome action and beautiful paneling, Gacha Akuta with its insane art style and angles and plot, and One Piece, with the best world I've ever had the pleasure of being a part of. I also love all the indie artists working their hardest to make something unique. For instance, Fooly Cooly Reanimated, which has 250 plus animators working on reanimating episode 5 in their own unique styles, as well as just the average webcomic creators. I would rather read 1,000 webcomics before I'd ever read one more manhwa. That's about it. Toodles.